Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, June 6th, 2023. I've actually been looking forward to this broadcast for a while, and it's not all good news. I've been looking forward to it because definitely what I feel from my own childhood, the wound that I identify with more is the wound of abandonment, more than the wound of intrusiveness, more than enmeshment. And maybe that's why I'm so sensitive to intrusion and enmeshment because the style that I grew up, the flavor that I grew up with, the soup that I was cooked in, if you will, is more about loneliness and not being parented than it is about being overparented. So I'll talk about more of that as we go along. So I'm excited to talk about it. I think there's several things that I want to talk about with regard to abandonment, but I'm going to talk around it or related to it before I get into the abandonment issue specifically. So first and foremost, I want to talk about what is abandonment, kind of defining it. And first of all, I want to define what it's not, to be clear. I've shared this quote before, and I love this language that she uses. Amber Dalzin. She said, "Secure attachment is the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free." So it's this, like a lot of things in mental health. It's a paradox. I've always thought that one of the most interesting things about attachment and connection is that in self-help literature, it's referred to often as healthy detachment. Specifically in codependency work or in the addiction world, they talk about or invite healthy detachment quite often. They'll use that language. And the reason that they talk about healthy detachment or that they use that term is because it feels like more separation than people are accustomed to. It's contrary to the typical style that most people are related to, and that most of the issues around addiction and codependency are about overconnection. So detachment is a step away from that. And as I will explain later tonight, if you move from enmeshment to healthy boundaries, this is really important. If you move from enmeshment, from over-identifying, from fusion, from a too close of a connection, from overlapping boundaries to healthy boundaries, it will feel like abandonment. So it makes sense that in the literature and in the language they would talk about a healthy detachment. But healthy detachment is synonymous, exactly the same as healthy attachment. It's just a different word for the same thing. And the greatest, I think, interesting thing is because I read a lot from Buddhist teachers, from Eastern religions. And one of the things that Buddhists talk about specifically is this idea of non-attachment, that to be attached to expectations, to ideas, even to our ideas about people is unhealthy and leads to suffering for everybody involved. But attachment in child development and parenting, secure attachment or healthy attachment is synonymous with what the Buddhists are describing as detachment. So that's just an interesting thing because again, because I think we're so accustomed as human beings to be overly attached, that's our most common wounding, to be fused with each other, that steps away from that style are going to sound like abandonment. You're going to be accused of it. You're going to be feel like you're abandoning people. Just in the simplest ways, having a conversation with somebody and listening, deep listening, will feel to a lot of people like it's unnatural. One thing I've talked about in the last 6 months or so is that, and I think this is important for parents to understand, let alone their children, is that healthy behavior will feel wrong to you, or healthier behavior, I should say. Healthier behavior for virtually everybody feels wrong. It feels unhealthy. And I think most of us assume I've got the answers. I've got it figured out. I know what healthy is. I can define it and describe it. I think most of us have that assumption, that uncritical view of our own perspective, if you will. But the more work that I've done, and I'm not talking about over the course of weeks or even months, I'm talking about over the course of years. The more work that I've done on myself, the more work that I've done with other folks, the more I realize that the thing that blocks us, I mean, it's fear, of course. It's a fear of a lack of control, but it's a sense of shame, a sense of guilt that comes from taking steps toward greater health, healthier behavior. From the audacity to be you, I wrote this. I said, it is common to conflate love or loving too much with anxious attachment. Loving too much, I explain, is a euphemism for the unhealed attachment wound and its expression in an anxious parent. The problem in our relationships is not loving too much, but rather not enough self. We in enmeshment, in overconnection, we outsource our sense of self to other people. We look at the eyes, at the faces, at the responses of other people to define who we are. And if we had a parent that was capable of a secure and healthy attachment in our childhood, that reflection would be a reflection back on truly who we are, right? It would be a loving, compassionate, patient and understanding self. But every parent is human. Every human being, of course, is human. And so because we get out of childhood without the ideal sense of self, the ideal secure self. That's true of everybody. We look for the world. We look for ourselves and other people. We judge ourselves by other people's reactions. All of us do it. I've shared recently about a story about an interaction that I had with some friends, some acquaintances in New York City after a show, and how I was overwhelmed with emotion and with grief because of some personal stuff that was going on with me related to the show, and how I felt really, really awkward about it. And my adult daughter was able to explain to me that wasn't your feeling. What you were feeling and experiencing was beautiful, wonderful, and human based on your experience, and it made perfect sense. But the other person's discomfort with your emotions, discomfort with your feelings led you to believe that something was wrong with you. So I don't talk about loving too much. I don't think that really exists. The minute that you love too much, it becomes something else. It's like saying you're too healthy. There's no such thing as too healthy, because the minute it becomes more than healthy, more than too healthy, it becomes something else. But maybe we do that to try to make each other feel good. Maybe we talk about it that way because we haven't explored our own wounding. And so much, you guys, parents that are listening, and I know that there's a lot listening, I can't emphasize this too much. The work in this work is, as a parent, is to recognize and become comfortable with your humanness, with your fallibility, with your mistakes, to learn to experience an ego death, to let go of ego, to surrender the idea, the notion that the goal is to be good and right, but rather the goal is to be human, to be who you are, which, by the way, paradoxically, leads to greater expansion spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, intellectually, and so forth. Those with preferred patterns of enmeshment, like I mentioned, too close, intrusive, overlapping identification, those with these patterns will experience healthy boundaries as abandonment. Parents can expect, you can expect this sensation in their own bodies. You can expect to think that when you're taking a healthier stance with people, you can expect to feel this experience of abandonment. It will feel like it to you, and you will be accused of it. Parents can expect this sensation in their own bodies and can expect that others, including their children, will accuse them of abandonment. So if you get healthier and you have an enmeshed style or pattern of relating, which is the predominant issue for a lot of parents, especially in our program, your children will say that you don't love them and that you're abandoning them. And to the extent that you haven't become clear about your sense of self, who you are, you will be susceptible to the influence of those accusations. You'll be drawn back into old patterns of behavior. I've talked about that with parents who have done a great deal of work over a long period of time, and they're coming into their own, and they're setting clear boundaries, and they're being punished and accused by the people that they care about, that they're in relationship, that they want to maintain relationship with. They're being accused of not loving, of being too rigid, of walking away, of abandoning. But that's to be expected. Something to plan for. If it weren't so, again, like with all of this, if getting healthier felt good, if getting healthier didn't cause fear or shame or guilt, everybody would do it. There would be no need for psychotherapy. We would just have simple lessons and lectures. From the journey of the heroic parent, I wrote, our children sense that we have a stake in their successes or failures. Right? This is true of so many of us. Often too much of a stake. This sense of being smothered can be described as psychologically swallowing them up as they become part of us. And while the style is often described in pop culture as overly identified, it is essentially abandonment because this fusion of selves does not see or acknowledge the other. When I'm in casual situations where I tell people about my day job, about being a therapist and a founder within a wilderness therapy context, a very common response, as I'm sure many of you who have gone through this process are familiar with, a very common response is, oh, this is a place that parents who don't want to deal with problems send their children. They send them away to get fixed. And what I say to people, if I'm interested in the conversation, and oftentimes I'm not anymore, but if I'm interested in the conversation and the relationship, I'll say, that's not what it feels like. It feels like the loss of an arm or a leg to the parents who send their children to our program. It causes them tremendous fear and anxiety. Oftentimes, they have to battle through waves of guilt and insecurity and shame to make a decision like this. And they tend to be, more often than not in our program, they tend to come from families, these parents and these children, they come from families where they're over-identified, where they're too connected, if you will, too reactive to each other, too dependent upon each other. But in a sense, if I over-identify with you, if I over-identify with my children, if I look at them and see myself, and that could be with anybody in the world, I am in a sense abandoning them. And so abandonment and disconnection are just only stylistically, superficially different than each other. And on the other side of the continuum is healthy attachment. Like that initial quote that I read, it's the delicate tangle of feeling safe, interconnected, independent, and free. Like so many things, it's paradoxical. Abandonment of the other is most often preceded by abandonment of the self. And that's going to be the theme of tonight. When we talk about the antidote to abandonment, it's really about being connected with yourself. I've talked about this in spiritual circles before, in spiritual contexts. People that are in recovery and finding a difficult connection to a higher power. What I often teach is that's symbolic of a loss of connection to yourself. So abandonment of the other is most often preceded by abandonment of the self. I've seen this in marriage and parenting and many other relationships. In other words, before we betray another person, we have betrayed ourselves. I've talked about this in my broadcasts about infidelity in marriage. That the if you look at chronologically the events that led to the infidelity on the part of the partner who's the cheater, if you will, if you look at it closely, you will see in virtually every case that individual first abandoned themselves. And then out of a feeling of resentment or anger or unexpressed need, they go and act it out. And that's really the template, isn't it? For all mental health issues. If we can't take care of our needs directly, if we can't take care of our needs assertively, then we will leak. We will sneak out the side door or the back window and get our needs met. We will overeat. We will overindulge in substances. We will, in the case that I was just describing, we will cheat on our spouse. So the foundational work, as is almost always the case, it's why I teach in our intensive program that the foundational work is individual therapy. And finding you is in many cases a great place to start when you're thinking about family therapy or couples therapy or co-parenting therapy. The relationship that we have with ourselves becomes the template and the pattern of all of our other relationships. And we can only relate to other people. The quality of our relationships to other people will be almost wholly dependent on the quality of the relationship we have with ourselves. So what does it look like when a child is abandoned? I was thinking about this. I want to say this as a side note before I get into this answer. It is so common for people to read my work or other people who write about child development and parenting and to miss a very specific and important point. That we might be talking about parenting, and you might not, if you're a listener or a reader or a watcher of these broadcasts, you might not even be a parent. And I've heard people say on many occasions, I get distracted because Brad's talking about parenting. Or in his book, he's writing about parenting. So I don't know how much it applies to me. But the thing I want to say to people and just plead to people is to invite them to remember, you are the child in the equation. When I'm talking about parenting and child development, yes, on the surface level, I'm talking about us as parents very, very often. But it's really important to be able to translate that to you being a child, because you were a child long before you were a parent. You were a child of other parents. The Drama of the Gifted Child, my favorite book on child development. One of the things that I try to teach people when they read it, because so many parents read it and are racked with guilt because they fall so short of the ideal. Because Dr. Miller describes in detail and in many ways the dents and the bruises that parents inflict on their children. But can you read that book? Can you read my books? Remembering that you're the child first? In fact, the tendency to not remember that you're a child first is a defense. It's a defense against looking at things that require and would that where we would benefit greatly from giving it our attention. So, as you're listening, as you're reading what I write, what I talk about, and many others, remember that when people are talking about child development and parenting, they're also talking about you as a child. In fact, probably foundationally, they're talking about you as a child. A colleague said to me one time, and it could be the gender isn't important, but I thought it was funny because I find it to be true in so many cases. She said, fathers tend to underparent while mothers tend to overparent. And that rings true with a lot of parents. And parents will polarize. The masculine style doesn't have to be male, right? Women can identify as male and masculine. I identify as largely having a feminine mindset. Dinner parties, I in many cases would gravitate toward the group of women talking versus the group of men talking, if that's the way the party's split up. Maybe it's because I was raised by a single mother. Maybe it's because of my work in therapy and my willingness or want to talk about feelings. So generally speaking, and I'll beg your indulgence to not get caught up on gender and to really talk about masculine and feminine, I want to describe a couple of things like this. The feminine gifts, which could come from the father or the mother or the non-binary parent. The feminine gifts are connection, empathy, nurturing, warmth, and belonging. That's a feminine style. I think it's fascinating that when you ask people about, everybody knows, I've said this before, everybody knows what toxic masculinity looks like and sounds like. And everybody knows what healthy femininity looks like. But you don't hear people talk about toxic feminine very often. That's not a phrase we hear in our culture. And you don't hear people talk about positive or healthy masculine. In fact, you hear it some, but in many cases, when people describe healthy masculine, they actually are describing feminine traits like nurturing, sensitivity, emotional responsiveness, warmth, those kinds of things. So the feminine wound, when taken too far, the feminine wounding is intrusion, where the parent is over identified with the child. The child has no individual sense of self. Let's talk about the masculine for just a moment. The masculine gifts are independence, self efficacy, autonomy, and protection, right? That's the masculine energy in parenting. The masculine wound is often abandonment or control, dominance. But the feeling is an unworthiness of love. So if I have the feminine wound, or sometimes, and I just beg your indulgence, or the mother wound, it's a lack of a sense of self, a lack of sense of individuation, a lack of separateness, a lack of self identity. If I have the masculine wound or the father wound, I don't feel worthy of love and attention. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel enough. Those who have suffered abandonment will try to show that they are worthy of love. They will either spend their energy trying to impress, entertain, or prove their worthiness, or they will suffer the dread of abandonment. In contrast, those with a history of intrusion and enmeshment will lack a sense of self. And again, this comes very clearly in my own work. I've never struggled with knowing what I want and with being decisive, which is a masculine trait, but I definitely have struggled with not feeling worthy of love. I've definitely felt like, having been abandoned myself, first by my father and secondarily and in different ways by my mother, I have definitely felt like, as an adult, I've spent most of my years as an adult trying to impress people, trying to show people how cool I am, how worthy I am, how lovable I am. And unfortunately, I've hurt a lot of people in that effort. I have walked on and hurt other people in that effort. I want to talk about the narcissistic wound. Maybe it's because I'm so interested in it, but I hear so many people talk about narcissists, and I talk about this on a broadcast that I did some time ago about the narcissistic wound. You can look back on. I think it's around episode 310, maybe 307, 311, somewhere in that range. The narcissistic wound is the wound of not being seen, of not having resonance, of not feeling intrinsically worthy of love, of attention, of connection. The wound is the narcissistic injury, a lack of connection and attachment in childhood. Right? It's abandonment, in one style, one form or another. Narcissism is not the result of being overvalued, and that is the most common mistake that people make. You can't overvalue a child. That's not a thing. Just like you can't love too much. The minute you start to do what people would describe as overvalue, you're doing something else. Narcissism is not a result of being overvalued. Instead, narcissism is the result of valuing the wrong thing in the child. How pretty they are, how smart they are, how talented they are, how obedient they are, cooperative they are, right? It's looking at behaviors in the child and valuing that, admiring that, giving attention to that. Admiration is often, in narcissistic development, admiration is often substituted where love should be. And I've done that to my children. I had it done to me first. I had some sense of this even when I was doing it to my children, but I couldn't shift the dynamic. I couldn't shift the behavioral patterns. Explaining the vacillating feelings of inflation and deflation, Alice Miller said, without therapy, it is impossible for the grandiose person, Reedy, narcissistic person, to cut the tragic link between admiration and love. I spent my whole life, like I said, having suffered the narcissistic wound myself. I spent my whole life trying to prove to people that I was worthy, interesting, valuable. And when people responded to me in the ways that weren't consistent with that need that I had, I was mean to them, unkind to them. Now, it looked sophisticated, it was justifiable in my mind, but I've done it. I've done it to students and clients. I've done it to parents that I've worked with, clients that I've worked with, done it to my own family. Without therapy, it's impossible for the grandiose person to cut the tragic link between admiration and love, because therapy, the kind of therapy that we do in attachment-based therapy or analysis, psychodynamic therapies, family of origin therapy, is we love all of you. We understand and we're compassionate and resonant with all of you. Not just the pretty and smart and talented parts, but with all of the parts. And when all of one is loved, one can be oneself, and one doesn't need symptoms to get needs met. Does that make sense? It's so terrifying. It's so paradoxical. It's so counterintuitive. I talk about this in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. I'm writing the book. I'm finishing the last polishing efforts of it. This is back a handful of years ago, of course. I'm on vacation with my wife and my youngest. They're doing things during the day in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and I'm working during the day, and then at night we hang out together. But one morning, as my daughter and I were cuddling in bed talking before they were heading out for the day, my daughter said to me, "I wish that my brothers and sisters were dead. I wish I was an only child," she said. But because I was writing and focused, I didn't react with a trauma response. I didn't react terrified at her morbid fantasy, her negative fantasy. I tuned into the need, and I said to her, and I wrote this in the book, it would be great if we could just spend more time, wouldn't it? It'd be all, you'd have us all to yourself. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I didn't resist. I embraced and leaned into it. And of course, after a couple of moments of silence with her relaxing with my response, the next words out of her mouth were, "Well, I would miss them. Emma, her older sister, is my best friend, and I love Jake." Wasn't too fond of the child that was just the one older than her. But do you see how that works? You know it works because you've done it in relationships before. You have validated somebody's extreme response to something and seen them come back to balance as a result of it. And we parents, because we're so anxious to shape our children up to be good, we react all the time. Everybody, I'm sure, listening or watching can imagine themselves in that scenario. I know I can. Imagine themselves in the scenario that I just described, saying, "Oh, you know what? Being an only child would have its problems too. And I thought you said you loved Emma the other day and that you were close," right? We do that. We want to control what our children think and feel. And when or as we do that, we cause their feelings and their thoughts that are natural, normal human feelings, we cause them to go underground. We cause them to be hidden under the bed and in the closets. And they become the monsters under the bed and in the closet. That's what we think about, those where the boogeyman comes from. The boogeyman is this nebulous form of the repressed parts of ourself that we were told were bad or wrong. Who abandons whom? This is a really important point. In a very important sense, children cannot abandon parents. Only parents can abandon children. If you fear your child's abandonment, you are asking them to do something for you that was supposed to be done a long time ago when you were very young. To have our children love us, to have our children admire us, to adore us, right? Those experiences, sensations, those were to have happened to us in childhood. That is a healthy attachment. I've shared this before, but my mother said to me some years ago, she said, "You will never love your parents as much as you will love your children." And that was a great gift that she gave to me. It took the pressure off. I felt it already, but nobody had ever said it out loud to me. We are to come, this one relationship, this relationship between parent and child, we are to come essentially, we are to come having fed ourselves, both that day and historically, mostly historically, because in any given day, any of us is going to be tired or hungry or overwhelmed or stressed. That can happen to anybody and does happen to anybody, to anyone at some point in time. But over the course of time, the long arc, if you will, we take care of ourselves because fundamentally, it's not the child's job to take care of us. We don't know that because we were taught by our parents that we were supposed to take care of them, that was our obligation, that we were supposed to behave a certain way or not, so that they didn't feel scared or hurt or sad or worried or anxious. So when parents tell me, will my child abandon me? My response is, of course, empathic and patient, because I've had to learn this myself. But in essence, the point that I get to is that's not the way that it works. Children don't abandon their parents. They might leave, they might set boundaries, they might run away, but it's not abandonment. The parent is supposed to develop, it's their job to develop this internal security that comes either from their own secure attachment in childhood or from an earned attachment through psychotherapy or things like psychotherapy. When we realized, Alice Miller says from the drama The Gifted Child, when we realize this is so beautiful, when we realize that all of our lives we have feared and struggled to ward off something that cannot happen any longer, it has already happened at the very beginning of our lives when we were completely dependent. That's what it means. We're trying to prevent something from happening that already happened. If you can imagine this theoretically, if I had a secure attachment as a father, okay, I'll just talk about it in the first person. If I got out of childhood with a secure attachment, having experienced a secure attachment, what people think about me, including my children, would have very little to no effect on me in this imagined state of health and wholeness. Secure attachment has the effect of, I can't really be abandoned because I'm with me. This is home. I carry it around with me, that peace, wherever I go. That's what a secure attachment feels like. It feels like I am home already. And then if somebody pushes me away or runs away or rejects me or doesn't like me or anything of the like, I don't experience it as reflective of me and my worth. I see them and their issues in that. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So if you're worried about your child rejecting you because of a parenting decision or decisions, you in essence asking the child to do something for you that was your parents' job. It's not our children's job to unconditionally love us, or as close as humanly possible to do that. But that was our parents' job, to come as close as possible and to make mistakes, of course, as humans, but to constantly come back to repair, to be there for us. The mistake that many people make, what is the mistake that many people make? Is that they make the mistake of not understanding that abandonment, that healthy relationships, healthy boundaries feel much more distant than we're comfortable with. And that it is our children. One of the most common things that parents will tell me, one of the most common things that they'll tell me is they'll define or describe their child's trajectory, their child's story narrative. And part of what they include in that is that the child doesn't like them. When the child was younger, the child was close to them. But as I explain, how a child feels about a parent is not necessarily an indication of the child's mental health. And because adolescence is a time of self-development, of identity development, it's perfectly natural and normal and healthy for a child to have some rebellion, to experience the full range of feelings towards their parents. And if the parent resists the negative feelings, right? What we resist persists. If the parent resists the anger, the hurt, the frustration, that those feelings go underground and become expressed symptomatically. And that's the mistake that many, many parents make, is they don't honor that developmental perspective. And like I say all the time, go to other places, other sources to fill your cup. Fundamentally, I've been talking about this lately. The experience of parenting is not an experience where it's fulfilling every day, wonderful every day. Parenting is sacrifice and compromise. It's the subjugation of needs on a continual basis. Learning how to take care of yourself and yet be there for the child. How can we guard against abandonment, abandoning our children? Self-care, which will cause guilt, right? Self-care can look like a lot of things. I won't get into the details of what it can look like, but what I will say is that most often that a person who's trying to improve, take steps forward toward healthier self-care, will feel guilty. They will feel that they're doing something wrong, and the people around them will collude with that old script and tell them that they're doing something wrong. So self-care is selfish, for lack of a better word. I don't use that word. I don't mean it in the way that it's intended, but for the sake of this discussion, it's being selfish in a healthy way. I used to always say about my clients in the field, when a client says, "What's in this for me?" I'm thinking, that's the greatest question in the world. I don't teach people things in therapy that cause their lives to be more miserable, not on purpose, I don't. So if a child says to me, or a parent for that matter, says, "What's in it for me?" I say, "Perfect question. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the joy, the meaning, the expansion of the soul, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, that comes from this thing, this task that I'm suggesting or presenting to you." So self-care is a must. If you don't come take care of yourself, if you come to the relationship hungry, you will eat the other person. If you come to the relationship hungry, you will blame the other person for your starving. But on contrarily, if you take care of yourself, you're going to be told by your inner voice and by other people that you're being selfish. And in the truest sense of the word, there's no third door. There's no option where we gracefully move toward greater awareness and health, and everybody around us and our inner voice applauds it. It just doesn't work that way. Self-work, I've listed as the second idea to avoid abandonment. And self-care and self-work are not the same thing, right? It's not. Self-work is improvement. Self-care can be resting, can be watching TV, can be just letting your nervous system relax, taking a break, walking away, dropping balls, letting go, coming up short. Those are all part of self-care. Self-work is the work that supports that self-care. It's self-exploration, self-awareness, learning, growing, knowing thyself, knowing yourself, developing a relationship with your sense of self. I know that a lot of the parents that are listening, some are alumni of our program, some are new to the program, some are in the middle of the program. But the foundational work is not giving you tools to fix your child. I did that for 15 years early in my career because that's all that anybody taught me. And that's all anybody wanted to hear about anyway on these broadcasts. So for years and years and years, I just talk to people about strategies to help the child, to facilitate change in the child. And now the bulk of my energy, the primal focus of my work is knowing yourself, coming to terms with yourself. And like I said earlier in the broadcast, I can't overemphasize this enough. It's becoming aware of and loving your horrible, rotten self. It's dropping the defense. When your child, when somebody said, even when I teach something where you measure yourself against it and you're coming up short, my response to that is, yeah, that's what it feels like. When you awaken to the history of your mistakes and how you've hurt people, it feels pretty crappy. Feels pretty horrible. But you keep working on that. You stick with the therapy, you stick with the podcasts, right? You spend time around other people who don't think that the goal of life is to be good and get it right, but rather to be human and embrace that. You continue to do that work, and after a while, it's just as simple. It's when your children say, "Mom, Dad, you're crappy," fill in the blank. Your response is, "Yeah, sure. I know. I'm more aware of it than you are. Thank you for telling me. I'm glad you're talking about it." Or if you're overwhelmed, saying, "I can't hear this right now. I've got to go feed myself," right? Because right now I'm hungry. And to get critical feedback is going to press up against my defenses, my ego, my need to be good, my need to be right. We have to tolerate the feelings of shame and the urge to flee. Flee ourselves first. Flee the child. I'm going to say this as plainly as I can, mom and dad. Children that come to our program, children that struggle with mental health issues, those issues are worthy of exploration. And the child, no matter how old they are, from 5 to progressing forward to 55 to 65 to 75, no matter how old the child is, eventually the work is going to be to grapple with what they're made of, who they are. That's the issue. Having said that, I want to say this: you're a handful. You've got issues. You've got weaknesses. You've got flaws. You've got mental health issues. You've got anxieties that you think are being created outside of you by other people. You have attachment wounds. You're not as good as of a listener as you think. You're not as assertive. You're not as wise as you think. Now, you're also beautiful and wonderful and worthy of love. You're absolutely fundamentally worthy of love. You're a miracle. You're all of those things. But those things are a little bit easier to accept for most people, for many people. But the real work is knowing you got stuff. The longer I do this work, and when I say this work, I mean, these broadcasts are just an extension of my own personal work. The longer I do this work, the more I realize I got stuff. I'm tough. I'm a tough father. I'm a tough husband. I'm a tough friend. I'm a tough employer, colleague. And I try to make peace with those aspects of myself. And I try to make peace with those things, first of all, because it gives me peace, because it's true. Anything else is denial. But I also do it because the more I make peace with my horrible, rotten self, the more I can love other people. The better the friend I am, the better the father, the better the husband I am, the better the colleague, the better the boss I am. And the work is lifelong. The work will go on until I take my last breath. It's really about ego work, about ego death, about letting go of being good, about letting go of the fantasy that I'm some gift to my children. I'll be clear. My children will tell you, if they were to describe me, they would describe wonderful gifts that I have and my wife have. They would. But they wouldn't stop there. They would also be able to describe in some detail my narcissistic wounding and how it shows up in the relationship. And my wife's also. They would. But the goal is for me to do enough work so that they can be themselves, which means that they can feel what they feel and they don't need to feel what I need them to feel. That's ego work. Ego work is the defense, right? The defense comes from the ego that protects me against threats because I grew up believing that it was my smartness, my talents, my looks, my achievements that led to my worthiness. So if you tell me that I'm a buffoon someday, that's horribly threatening to me, to my ego. So my ego deflects, blames, argues, debates. My ego creates a story in my head where what you've just said isn't true. The more I can let the ego die, the more I get curious. The more I wonder, the more I look at myself, the more I'm able to see the truth, no matter how big a part of what you've said is, I can find the truth in it. Most people and most therapists don't understand the role of a parent in child development. They think that child development, that parenting is like other relationships. The child is crushed under the weight of the parent's ego, need to be good, need to be right, need to be a good dad, good mom, good parent. The child is grossly burdened by that. And the reason I talk about sharing feelings with children in a way that looks very, very critically at the motives behind it is because children are tempted, are drawn to want to make the parents feel good about themselves. Because if the parent doesn't feel good about themselves, the parent might run away. And if the parent runs away, the child will die and be alone. So we learn to stay. We learn to grapple with our guilt and our shame. We learn not to flee. We learn to let go of the ego. We understand that it's not the child's job to tell us how great we are, to tell us how much they love us. And of course, the great irony is the more we take care of ourselves, the more they tell us how wonderful we are, the more they'll come back over and over again, not out of a sense of obligation or duty to us. I don't want that. I don't want my children to come because they're owed it, that I'm owed it, or they owe it to me, or because that's what good children do. I want them to come back because they want to come back, because they feel good being in my presence, being in my home. I talk about in episode 309, that's right around 2 or 3 weeks around when I did the one on narcissism. A really great, for me, a really great broadcast is challenging our culture's idea of what it means to be a good parent. And in essence, what I talk about in that broadcast is that a good parent is a capable parent. A good parent understands how flawed they are and can sit with that relatively comfortably. Doesn't need to be thought of by the child as a good parent. Avoid trying to fill the holes inside of you with your children. See, that's why the first work in parenting is to go back to your childhood. The first work in marriage is to go back to your childhood. The first work in the struggle that you're having at work or with your career or with your purpose is to go back to your childhood. Because the way that human beings are built is through the experience of growing up. There's nature, what they're born with genetically, of course, and then there's nurture, which is parenting and sibling relationships and culture and school and peers and community and the faith group that they belong. It's all the things around them. So we go back to self. We go back to finding you. That's the great doorway to all the wisdom. That's why the Greeks wrote it on the temple of Apollo as one of the maxims. Know thyself. And if you know yourself, that means that you know all sides of yourself, not just the pretty, smart, talented, beautiful parts, but you know the dents and the bruises, the weaknesses, the not so positive inclinations. And you're free, you're liberated, and you're capable of loving more. Because otherwise, it's in the service of your ego. If you're doing something as a friend to be a good friend, that's not love. If you're doing something to be a good parent, that's not, by its definition, love. That's in service of the ego to be good. But to love is to come to terms with the fact that you're all of it. You're bad, you're good, and everything in between. And then love is an expression of something left over and above, some kind of abundance that you share. That's why I say when you accept that you're the devil, you're finally free to love. And that's what I mean. But if you're struggling and scraping, like I have most of my life struggled and scraped to prove to the world, to myself, to the people around me that I'm good, love isn't there. Love isn't found there. I'm just trying to feed the child that was starved to death inside of me. This is what Carl Jung meant when he said, the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. This is your work. They're out there if you're they're out there working on themselves, and this is your work. I tell future parents that having children because they think they can give them a wonderful life doesn't necessarily work out well for the child or the parent. Mature parents, on the other hand, understand that raising children enlarges the soul through love, expressed as sacrifice, compromise, the subjugation, the temporary set aside of needs, and self-reflection. You know, there's a line in the Letters of Juliet where she realizes that she can't really love her husband because she can't get beyond her own wants and needs. That's true of a lot of people. They're so empty, they're so starved, they're so unaware of their unmet needs that live inside of their bodies that they can't get beyond them. And they show up to marriages or relationships starving, grasping, trying to get something for them. Instead of going out in the world and finding ways to feed yourself and then showing up to the people that you love, to the people that I love, and to the people that I serve professionally. That's why I end all of these broadcasts saying, thank you for showing up and being willing to do the work. For and on behalf of the people that love you and that you love, thanks for showing up and doing your work. That's why I say that every time. To listen, to deeply listen, mom and dad, husband and wife, husband and husband, wife and wife, to listen deeply. You've got to be grounded enough, fed enough, satiated enough to be able to temporarily set aside your needs and not have it be a trigger or a trauma response. The reason it's so difficult to listen to people is because when we set aside our needs temporarily, it reminds us of our narcissistic wounding as children, that we weren't heard or taken care of or responded to. That is why we parents respond defensively to our children so often. Even today, that's why I respond to my children so often, is because I'm missing something in myself. Either in the big picture, or I might be hungry or tired or stressed. There is nothing, I wrote, nothing so important or so difficult as parenting. And maybe the most important thing where you will consistently fail. This is its gift. This is why it expands the soul. Sigmund Freud said, if you want to teach somebody something, set them up with a task that they are sure to fail at. And I can think of nothing better than encouraging somebody to be a parent, because there's nothing you'll fail at more. I shared this, you could take a screenshot of this with your camera, this response to the other, the safe versus the unsafe, safe ways. Not abandoning somebody means being present with yourself first and foremost, and means being capable of being present with them, of seeing them, and of supporting the child where they need to go. Not abandoning somebody means that you've done enough work to fill your bucket, and maybe even a little bit more so that you have something to give. Not abandoning somebody means that you stay through the guilt and through the shame, through the failure after failure after I failed today as a father and husband. I will fail tomorrow. I will fail the next day. It's just part of being human. And in embracing that, ironically, paradoxically, and embracing that, I become larger. I become more capable. So what would I say in conclusion? This is a lifelong work. I've been in therapy for 27 years, for 24 years with this therapist. I have no plans to quit therapy because the work is forever. It's not fast or quick or easy. It's not fast or quick or easy for your children, and it's definitely not fast or quick or easy for you. Come to befriend your proclivities, your tendencies, your styles, your wounds, and your trauma responses. And to do that, you've got to, my experience is the best way to do that is to spend time with a non-judgmental, empathic other who doesn't gasp at your rage, at your selfishness, at your mistakes or your idiocies, but who chuckles along with you, loves you, sees you. And the more that somebody can sit with you, see, this is the opposite of abandonment. The more that somebody can sit with your horrible, rotten self, the more that you can sit with your horrible, rotten self, and then the more you can sit with your child's horrible, rotten self. That's how it works. I wish there were workaround or shortcuts. I wish some of these theories that promise quick symptom reduction could heal the soul and make us whole, but they don't. They help reduce symptoms. They help us manage sometimes what feels overwhelming to us. But the work is a lifetime, and the work is coming to terms. The work is becoming who you are. The work is the distance between your inclinations, your tendencies, and the ideal attachment responses that I described on the last slide. Safe versus unsafe, whole versus partial. Abandonment is not about proximity. There are people who are in the same house as their children and who have abandoned them. There are people that stay married for 50 years who have abandoned each other. Abandonment is not about proximity. And that is why sending your child to a program is not abandonment. Not responding to your child's needs is abandonment. The abandonment is about the connection or not, the resonance or not, and the willingness and the clarity to help get the child to where they need to go. I'm going to just end with this, guys. Nothing I've talked about tonight is popular. Nothing I talked about tonight, for the most part, is common. You're not going to hang up from this podcast or this broadcast. You're not going to walk out into the world and be able to engage people with this information. It's rare. It's uncommon sense. But it's the road less traveled, which, by the way, if you're familiar with the book, The Road Less Traveled, that's what it means. I think it's what is meant when people talk about, the road to heaven and the road to hell. The straight and narrow, right? It's narrow not because it's unpleasant. It's difficult for sure, but it's narrow because not a lot of people are traveling on it. So as you go to therapy, as you listen to these broadcasts, as you read my books, as you engage in this curriculum that I and others teach, because this is not my curriculum, right? This is from the masters. You'll find that you'll find yourself in situations and in company that you can relate to less and less and less. Because it's just as lonely on the top end of the bell curve as it is at the bottom. You have just as much company at the top of the bell curve as you do at the bottom. And so part of it is finding your tribe, and part of it is cutting out compassionately, consciously, the people that are not supportive of your growth. All right, folks. That's all for this evening. Just for upcoming events, announcements. First of all, my two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you would like to do a deep dive in your own work, I can't emphasize this enough. I cannot endorse this enough. If you don't want to come to our program, go to one like it. Write me an email, webinar@evoketherapy.com, and I'll give you the names of other programs that do work like this. But our version of it, which I'm fond of course, is called Finding You. June 21st to 25th, there's a spot left for that. The next one after that is June 19th through 23rd. We also have an online option. The next offering is July 14th through 16th. It's half of the time, a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. So if resources like money and time are really critical for you, scarce for you, online Finding You is an option. We also have Returning to You for people who have been to Finding You. October 11th through 15th is our current date. And then I'm going to be doing a Finding You weekend in the UK. There is a waiting list there, but if you're interested, you can check that out. We have custom programs for couples and parents called Finding Connection, and we also have Finding Family for families. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have support groups for current and alumni families. The next offering is this Thursday, June 8th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. We also have one meeting a month for former parents of our wilderness therapy program. June 27th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering. Intensives also have a meeting once a month. June 13th at 6 p.m. is the next offering. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com. That's SARA, the letter D at evoketherapy.com, or go to evoke.com/family involvement for more information or to sign up there. If you want a coach who's been instructed in this attachment model that I'm describing tonight, we have coaches for parents, couples, families, or individuals. Just contact coaching@evoketherapy.com. They can do it virtually no matter where you are. We encourage all current parents to try at least 6 of the following 12-step support groups. Any combination of alanon.org, coda.org, familiesanonymous.org, or adultchildren.org. You can do them virtually or in person. You can also go to refugerecovery.org to find another support group that includes mindfulness. It's a Buddhist-inspired program, less of an emphasis on a higher power if that's a sticking point for you. And then the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI.org, has great classes and resources that are free in your local communities. All of these broadcasts are available through the podcast platform, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, like there, subscribe there, rate us there, give us feedback there. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can also go to our YouTube channel, Evoke's YouTube channel, and watch the rebroadcast of these recordings there with the videos and my slides. You can find Evoke Therapy programs or me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter or Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy. You can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, we have a blog with wonderful content each week. Somebody was just telling me today, this is such a cool thing about Evoke. So many of the blogs written by our staff are about their own work. It's a humble share of their own work, their own struggles. Because why wouldn't it be? We tell parents to do their work. Why wouldn't we be doing our work? It's the same thing. So our blog has wonderful, wonderful, heartfelt content from our staff and therapists, sometimes parents. If you would like to give back, if you'd like to give back financially for people that can't afford treatment, our 3 charitable partners include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, or EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark your donation for a specific population or for a specific program. My next broadcast will be 48 hours from now on June 8th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll have a live Q&A. Any questions that came in tonight will be saved. We'll share those questions on the outset. You can always email us with questions, suggestions, clarifications, sharing at webinar@evoketherapy.com. And we'll take all the live questions we'll take all the pre-submitted questions on that broadcast before the live questions. You're also welcome to invite family and friends to that live broadcast. All right, folks. Like I said earlier, I hope this is a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love. Thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in about 48 hours. Take care. Bye-bye.